Hello and welcome to the President's Podcast right here on the record with the Ohio Senate. The views the news excludes. I'm John Fortney, the Director of Communication with the Senate Republican Caucus, the Majority Caucus in the Ohio Senate. Great to have back on the program today State Senator Jane Timken, Republican from Canton, Ohio. Really a painful and poignant week this week as we remember the 24th remembrance of 9/11, Patriots Day, and the 2,977 Patriots that died that day. But then a day before, on September 10th, the political assassination of 31-year-old Turning Point USA director Charlie Kirk shocked the nation as he was shot in front of a crowd of 3,000 students at Utah Valley State University. Senator Timken, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's been a very painful week with the assassination of Charlie Kirk. He was a strong conservative voice. He brought so many young people into the party. He was strong and courageous and a man of faith. And to have him gunned down in the way he was in a public space with 3,000 young kids there was devastating for me to watch that happen. And then you overplay that with the loss of so many lives on 9/11. You know, right after 9/11, we said we will never forget. But in this country, I think we've forgotten those folks whose lives were lost and the terrorist attack that happened on our U.S. soil. We need to stand strong for our country. And as many of you may remember, right after 9/11, everyone was displaying their American flags proudly. They were standing up for America. And we came together as Americans. And we are incredibly divided now. But what concerns me is that the liberal left is trying to silence conservatives. We have gone from cancel culture, where people are canceled for speaking their truths, speaking out. If you say the wrong thing, you get canceled. Charlie Kirk was speaking his truth and having dialogue with people who disagreed with him. I think it was incredibly important. He always wanted to have someone who disagreed with him to come to his events so that they could talk. You know, he said that when you don't talk, our country falls apart.
That's when bad things happen.
Right.
Yeah. When people stop talking, he said, that's when bad things happen.
Right. And so instead, they silenced him permanently. And the effect is, what does that do to the rest of us who are strong conservatives, who believe in our faith? Does that make us want to be more silent, to hide? And my message to folks is, courage is not the absence of fear, but it's action in the face of fear. And we need to stand up for our conservative values and speak up more than ever. I hope the legacy of Charlie Kirk is that we need to speak what we believe in our conservative values, our belief in the freedoms of our country, and particularly the freedom of speech. You see in the UK an Irish comedian arrested for tweets, arrested. He's going to be prosecuted. This is outrageous.
And I think the charge was for creating anxiety. I mean, they've gone off the rails in the UK.
Off the rails. And, you know, they don't have the First Amendment protections we have. And we need to stand up strong for our First Amendment rights. I don't expect anyone to always agree with me. It's unreasonable to do that. And I like to have that dialogue and debate. You know, my dad was a law professor. He believed in the Socratic method, and we would have it every day at the dinner table. But he wanted to hear our opinions, why we thought certain things. And we have to be comfortable with disagreeing with someone and still caring about them as a human being and respecting them. And that's my hope for our country.
Yeah, that was the beautiful thing and the tremendous courage that Charlie Kirk, had. He was able to go in to that sea of liberal indoctrination, a sea of enemies, a sea of indoctrinated young minds and mush, one of the main reasons why we passed Senate Bill 1 in the state of Ohio, to bring the focus back to education rather than indoctrination, and have a conversation with these young kids who were often extremely agitated, very angry, and he would say, well, tell me why you feel that way. You know, they would call him a fascist, a racist, or whatever, and he'd say, well, what have I said that you believe I'm that way? And one thing you'll read in the content on the record this week, I have a link to an exchange with a young man at one of the events, and he could not articulate why, but he just stormed off. I mean, it seems like there is a significant element of angry, unhappy, outraged young people out there, but they don't really understand why. They've been whipped into a frenzy, and much of this is happening on college campuses. And he had the courage to try to have that dialogue that we just talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that Charlie was very strong in was his faith. He was a great voice for the pro-life movement. He believed in the sanctity of life, and having that dialogue with people who are pro-abortion, having that exchange where, he would say, they would say, well, it's just an embryo. And he would say, it's a human. This is a human baby. Yeah,
like, weren't you an embryo at one point?
Right. And I think it's incredibly important that his voice to stand up for his religious beliefs, his personal beliefs. I think you've seen, it's interesting on college campuses. There was actually an article in the Harvard Magazine talking about how there is more of a move to the conservative movement than you would think on that campus. I think we're starting to see a change, in large part because of someone like Charlie Kirk in Turning Point, who went to college campuses and had those dialogues and challenged the thinking. We should always welcome the challenge to our thoughts. That's part of the intellectual debate that every human being should engage in, to make sure that, is your thinking correct? Is this the right way to think? And are you willing to listen to an opposing view and respect that person at the same time? There's oftentimes we disagree with the Democrats, but we can still have a conversation about your kids, about your family. We're all Ohioans, we're all Americans. We all should get together and stand up for our country and our freedoms.
I thought it was very rude and very poor behavior on the floor of the House when a moment of silence was called by Speaker Johnson, and the Democrats, a handful of them, or however many it was, shouted it down. I mean, that's part of what you were saying. It's part of being canceled. We have press conferences at the State House sometimes, and there's protesters who are trying to shout down, and many of them paid protesters, shout down and cancel the ability to have a press conference, which is part of free speech.
Absolutely. And what happened on the U.S. House floor was outrageous. Here we have someone who was executed for participating in political speech, and the Democrats didn't want to have any of it. They couldn't believe that there would be a moment of silence. You contrast that with the Yankees game, where they had a moment of silence for Charlie Kirk. They recognized in New York City the importance of Charlie Kirk's voice.
Yeah, I mean, of all places where, it's not exactly a conservative town, right? But yet, because I think 9/11 certainly resonates with the people of New York, all the firefighters that died 24 years ago, climbing those towers, right, to do their job and rescue people and put others before themselves. New York understands the value of people who have honor, a sense of duty and integrity.
Right. And we were very patriotic after 9/11. And you see on the left this where they won't stand for the flag, where they won't talk about patriotism or how great our country is. That's a bad thing. To say, make America great again is bad. We live in the greatest country in the face of the earth. We have the greatest democracy. We're about to celebrate our 250th birthday next year. There's a lot to celebrate in this country. And I don't think that it is a winning message for the Democrats to continue to try to cancel, silence dissenting views.
Well, they like to define what they call hate speech. And to them, hate speech are things basically for the same reason we started up on the record, the Views the News Excludes, because we were requested to censor ourselves on a column that we had submitted on behalf of Senator Gavarone. The two lines that they wanted removed were, the real extremists believe that men can have babies and that boys belong in girls' locker rooms. And that's hate speech.
That's incredible to me.
Yeah, and I was told we can't print that because it's dehumanizing to a group of people. And I said to the editor, what group would that be? Women?
Right.
We've gone so far off the rails of reality and facts and science that it's really chilling and troubling to think that your children could be targeted in elementary school, K through 12. And some of the social media that I saw this week where, teachers were and others in a position of being, quote unquote, an educator, were celebrating a political assassination over political speech.
It's sick. It's sick. And what's happening is that you have people tagging those social media posts celebrating Charlie Kirk's assassination, and they're losing their jobs. You saw that an MSNBC contributor, Matthew Dowd, was fired because he basically said that Charlie Kirk deserved it. The lunacy of the left has gone so far when they say men can have babies, or they're calling women birthing people. I am not a birthing person. I am a mother. And biologically, men cannot have babies.
Pregnant people, I think, is what they like to call it.
Birthing people.
Birthing people. Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah, exactly. The Columbus Dispatch had an article by Laura Bischoff, who's been a longtime State House reporter, and the title of it is Charlie Kirk, the headline, Charlie Kirk murder, latest case of political violence. Can democracy survive in America? And there was a quote in it from one of the new professors at Ohio State University's Salmon Chase Center for Civics, Culture, and Society, which is one of the 5 centers that the General Assembly funded specifically for this reason, to teach civics and dialogue and having this type of debate, especially for law school students. And here is what Michael Clune said. He said, I have a lot of faith in American democracy, but I'd be lying if I didn't say that I am very worried and troubled by the rise of extreme intolerance and the attitude that one sees on the political extremes that people with opposing views should be allowed to articulate their perspective, but should be the targets of violence. And that seems to be the new norm, at least of a small vocal percentage of radical left that believes, you're fascist because we say you're a fascist. And they wouldn't know the difference between fascist and freedom if they were educated in a gulag, really. I mean, they just don't have any facts to stand on. It's just this emotional tidal wave that they continue to build on. And it all goes back, I think, to the 2 talking points of the Democratic Party: identity politics and class warfare. It's all about skin color. It's all about the things that make you different and why you're oppressed. And we hate wealthy people. We hate success in America is their mantra. Where were you 24 years ago on 9/11?
Yeah. I will never forget that morning. My husband said to me, I'm flying to D.C. I'm doing some Hill visits. And he flew into D.C., and by the time he got up to Capitol Hill. He had driven by the Pentagon. Everything was fine. He was unaware of what had happened in New York City. By the time he got to Capitol Hill, you could see the Pentagon burning. And that's when the evacuation orders were held for announced for the Capitol. People were streaming off the Capitol out into the streets, worried and wondering what had happened. By that time, people knew that 2 planes had hit the World Trade Center, and they knew that America was under attack. Many may remember no one could get in touch with anyone. Cell phones were down. And I couldn't get in touch with my husband for quite some time. I had other family members who were in D.C. as well, right near the White House at that time. It just happened to be that day. I didn't know where my husband was, what had happened to him, and at the same time, Flight 93 was flying over our airspace. I literally was driving to pick my son up from his preschool, and that plane was flying over us. And unfortunately, we had brave Americans tackle the pilots and take that plane down.
Yeah, Todd Beamer said, "Let's roll."
Let's roll. Yeah. That plane was headed to D.C., and I can't help think that if it hadn't been for those brave Americans, who knows whether that plane would have hit the Capitol, the White House, and what would have happened that day. And we can't forget that there are people in this world who hate America, and we need to stand strong for this country we love.
That's one reason why I'm thankful that the border is now secure.
Absolutely. There were, I think, estimated at least 150 individuals on the terrorist watch list that got into this country under the Biden border. They hopefully have been removed. We don't know, but the fact that we were allowing people with no vetting, no identification, to infiltrate into our country in a world where we are threatened every day. I prayed every day that during the Biden administration we did not have a terrorist attack, because it was incredibly likely that that could happen.
Yeah, and also, I mean, you just look at what President Trump did, and to Governor DeWine's credit, had the Ohio National Guard be part of the group that went in to not only to keep the peace in major American cities where crime was out of control. The amount of murders in Chicago, Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, not safe to walk around. Now it is.
Yeah. And you know, the mayor of D.C. has welcomed it and has asked the president to extend the National Guard. And Governor DeWine has said that our Ohio National Guard is going to stay there. President Trump secured the border. We have seen very little crossings and apprehensions at the southern border and the northern border, for that matter. We have to protect our country and our sovereignty. I can't just walk into Canada and say, I want to become a Canadian citizen. They would pick me up and send me back to Ohio. We can't continue to open our borders. And the thing that worried me the most during that whole situation was the unaccompanied minor children that went unaccounted for. And where are these children? I mean, there are stories that they are being trafficked. They are being forced into child labor. It's outrageous that that would happen in our country to these vulnerable children. And thank God for President Trump for stopping that.
One of the things that made me really angry this week as well is one of those, when I said poignant and painful, but also angering types of weeks, was the murder of Ukrainian refugee on the train in Charlotte, Irina Zaruska. Young 20-something-year-old young woman sitting alone, and somebody who had been in and out of jail for violent crime 14 times slits her throat and walks away. That's why the National Guard is in some of these cities, despite some of the Democrats protesting and saying, oh, we're using the military against our own citizens. Well, no, we're using the military to try to clean up violent crime. to help law enforcement that clearly needs help or has not been empowered to do so. And that part of this has to be that a message needs to be sent to judges to enforce the law.
Well, and you talk about Arena's case in Charlotte. That assailant's mother knew that he had mental health problems. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia. His mother said that he should not be released. In fact, as I understand it, his own attorney said he should not be released, and the judge went ahead and released him. That is incredible to me. We have to have consequences for criminal actions. Once someone is convicted, they should remain in prison, appropriately sentenced, until they are rehabilitated and appropriately paroled. We cannot have criminals roaming the streets and have a revolving door of crime in this country. We cannot allow that. We have to protect the innocent people that get on a light rail train going home after a shift working in a pizza shop. That poor woman. And that man was mentally ill. And we need to have that conversation about mental illness. But we have to embrace the police activities that President Trump has put in place, the National Guard. I believe he's going to go to Memphis as well. When people can't feel safe to walk down the street, when in cities like Chicago, when it's a normal weekend when 100 people are shot and 20 are dead, how do you live in those cities? And it's the most vulnerable people who are suffering the most, because the cops won't go into neighborhoods because they'll get gunned down themselves. And so having the National Guard there to protect the police, to make sure that we are arresting people. I mean, you look at the numbers out of D.C., there have not been any murders in weeks because of their presence. There were daily murders in Washington, D.C., the murder capital of the world, per capita.
Per capita. Yeah, what I really enjoyed watching was when the people living in D.C., the neighbors, actually came up to the guardsmen, to the soldiers, and said, "Thanks for being here. This is the first time we've been here in this park in months." Right. Because we can't come here safely. We can't bring our kids here.
It's our nation's capital. A few months ago, just walking around D.C., Farragut Park, McPherson Square, they are beautiful parks, but they were filled with homeless people, and no one would walk by there at night for fear of getting stabbed or robbed or killed.
Right. Back here in Ohio, you were, many of you know that Senator Timken is the former co-chair of the Republican National Committee, also the former chair of the Ohio Republican Party.
I was the chair. I'm National Committeewoman, not the co-chair of the RNC.
Well, there you go. So I stand corrected on that. But you've been in some significant leadership positions. Let's say that. Well, you have another position of leadership. You were recently appointed to be the co-chair of the Ohio Redistricting Commission. Your thoughts on that? The Democrats rolled out a map for consideration, and of course the process under Article 19, of which, by the way, 75% of the voters approved in 2018, that requires compact districts. That process gets underway September, October, and November. Just your overall thoughts on that.
Well, first of all, I want to make it clear, and as you have noted, that the current maps are constitutional. And but per our Constitution, Ohio is required to redraw our maps because the map was only valid for 4 years. So we are going to go through that process. We're going to follow the law and the Ohio Constitution. I'm sure that the Democrats may be screaming and yelling. I've heard some over-the-top rhetoric about the congressional maps, which I think is inappropriate. I think there have been comments that I think from the Democrats that have been highly inappropriate.
Here's one of them from their news conference. Andrew Tobias, who works for Signal, Ohio, he had worked for Cleveland.com, but he's been a State House reporter for a while, posted on X, House Minority Leader Danny Isaacson says people will lose health coverage. hospitals will close, and kids will go hungry at breakfast because of gerrymandering in Ohio. That kind of rhetoric is really outrageous and not believable at all, because as we were alluding to earlier, where are most of the crime problems and homeless problems and hunger problems? It's in big cities across the country, including Ohio, that are run by progressive leftist Democrats.
Absolutely, and you see the crime in those big cities. In my hometown in Cincinnati, we had the horrific event over the summer of the man and woman who were severely beaten for just being outside.
But it was
on the
politicized.
street.
It was politicized. I mean, that was the whole thing about, even in Charlotte, in the murder of Irina Zarutska, was the left tried to say Republicans are just politicizing this. They're politicizing this. It's not that big of a deal. No, it is a big deal when a young woman is murdered on a train of public transit.
Well, and as I understand it, going back to Cincinnati, those alleged perpetrators of that violent act, meant a few of them have already been released on bail. And that type of violence is bad for cities. Cincinnati has a vibrant downtown, and I think people will think twice about going downtown. But people want to go to the Reds games. They want to go to the Bengals game. They want to go to the restaurants and bars that are right there where that incident happened. We have to make sure that the fundamental role of government, first and foremost, is to make sure that our citizens are safe. And that is not happening in those cities.
Yeah, it only takes one video on social media to keep people inside, to keep people away.
Which is bad for the economy.
That's bad for the economy.
It's bad for the cities. It's bad, excuse me, it's bad for the citizens.
I wanted to get back to redistricting again before I let you go here. And one thing that I was talking about to the media, because, well, what's your comment? Does the Ohio Senate have a comment about the Democrats' new map? And I said, well, I think the most important thing to understand is, one, we're very early in the process, but two, keep in mind, as you pointed out, the congressional map that was drawn under Article 19 is constitutional. Now, for a long time, and you probably even moving forward, you'll hear coverage saying the unconstitutional maps ruled unconstitutional by the Ohio Supreme Court. Well, keep in mind, the U.S. Supreme Court vacated that narrow 4-3 O'Connor ruling on the congressional map, sending it back, which then, by a matter of law, makes that map constitutional. All the big cities in the state of Ohio, minus Columbus, because it exceeds the population limit, are within one congressional district. Instead of having that issue that voters defeated back in November, the political outcomes over people issue that we did a lot of programming here, a lot of coverage on, that would have stretched those districts out. And in this whole topic, this whole political fight, 4 years ago, started by the left saying, oh, look at these odd-shaped districts. And now you have compact districts that are required on both the General Assembly and also the congressional map under Article 11 and Article 19 that the people of Ohio passed. So this is about following the guidance of the voters and then trying to just weed out the politics of it.
Absolutely. And as I said, we will follow the law and the Constitution. I haven't studied the Democrats' map in great detail, but I see that there's a lot of interesting drawn districts. And I'm not sure that it's constitutional.
State Senator Jane Timken, Republican from Canton, Ohio, thanks for your insight and perspective. Really appreciate it. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.